call to order. This is a special meeting of the Putney Selectboard, January 11th, 2022. And we have joining us Sheriff Mark Anderson and Lieutenant Anthony French from the Westminster Barracks, I assume, of the Vermont State Police.
Yes, sir.
And we're going to have discussion today about data on crime in Putney and best practices moving forward. And I just want to, before we get going, any adjustments to the agenda, or are you?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
Yes.
So I want to make clear up front, and I think that that both of our guests will probably reiterate this as necessary, but it is not appropriate, or in most cases not legal, for them to talk specifically about certainly certain individuals, but also certain demographics within town. There are laws against that in the state, particularly newer laws passed in 2018, I believe it is, that protect basically any group that might be sort of targeted or profiled. And that includes socioeconomic status, et cetera. So if you have specific questions about specific issues in Putney, you may or may not get what you would consider a satisfactory answer. And I think that Sheriff Anderson's intent is to give a little bit of sort of an overview of what the statistics for the town show, and then both of our guests will be happy to answer questions, I'm sure, and talk about things that the people of Putney can do to take some responsibility for keeping an eye on neighborhoods, if that makes sense, and or looking out for their neighbors and themselves. So with that, you want to go ahead? Sure.
I'd be happy to. Good evening, everyone. I think I've met several of you before, but certainly not everyone. So I'm Mark Anderson. I'm the Sheriff of Windham County. I've been Sheriff since 2019, but have worked with the departments since 2004. So I'm not new to Putney, certainly not new to the community, and not new to this work. I think it's important for us to explain, because it's probably one of the most misunderstood concepts of how our policing systems in Vermont work. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, though I'm happy to respond to questions for it. And I'll also ask Lieutenant French to explain it from the state police perspective. But broadly speaking, you can think of policing in Vermont in tiers. So at the base tier would be the state police and the services that they provide. That is provided statewide, and there's some nuance to how that's provided, which I hope Lieutenant French will speak to. And then the second tier is the services that my department provides, which is supplemental to the services the state police provide. Towns can opt to have more than supplemental services. We previously provided full level service within Windham County in some towns. My agency is not funded by taxes for the purposes of law enforcement patrols. We provide a service of civil process, so those are legal documents out of the civil and family courts, as well as prisoner transports. Those are our statutory obligations. What we're most seen for within the communities, though, is the law enforcement work we do, and that represents roughly a quarter to a third of my budget through contract revenue. So we do provide services to Putney and Westminster. We share the time between the two towns, but it's 40 hours per town. That is covering what's supposed to be coverage from 7 a.m. Starting Monday morning to 10 p.m., and that runs Monday through Friday. So the two towns use one person between the two of them for a 16-hour day, or 16 hours of coverage, I should say. And we work with the state police both in terms of mutual aid as well as shared resources as needed, and we have relationships established to do that. I think that's, in short, how law enforcement works for me, but Lieutenant French, you want to talk about the state police?
I just feel a little awkward because I have my back to all of you, so I'm gonna just move for a second. Yeah, Mark pretty much covered it as far as law enforcement goes, but I'm Anthony French, I'm the station commander of the Westminster Barracks. We provide coverage for all the towns that do not have their own police departments. So if you call and that town doesn't have a police department, we will be responding. The sheriffs, as I said, have contracts, and so they're on duty in certain towns at certain times. So if they're on duty, they're the primary law enforcement agency. I apologize.
It's okay.
They're the primary law enforcement agency that will be responding to your call.
So I guess before we move on, are there any questions just to those brief introductions? And am I moderating? I don't want to be.
It's up to you. I'm happy to have you moderate if you want, or I'm happy to watch and keep track if you want.
If you don't mind, I feel it's
That'd be
appropriate.
fine. Okay, Laura, go ahead. And
Thank you.
if you're gonna ask a question or make a statement, if you could state your name, please, also.
Yes, I'm Laura Campbell, and the question is for Mark Anderson, I think. You mentioned covering Putney and Westminster from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m., Monday through Friday. And what happens on the weekends?
I was wondering that.
Coverage would revert to the state police.
That's what I've experienced. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Louise, you had a question?
I suppose it was from the 10 p.m. to 7 a.m., same answer. Louise Garfield speaking here.
Correct. And I'll also note that while the plan and the expectation is that we cover those hours, because of the way we're funded, if I have a staff member who's sick, we don't necessarily have someone who can fill in. I'm currently down one position. So I have a single deputy working 1.5 to 2 shifts per day, or 12 to 16 hours a day. So that's not a sustainable model, but in an effort to provide the service to both towns, that's what we've been working on. Part of that is because of a local, state, and national problem towards getting law enforcement training through COVID. I'm currently down, I think, 2 full-time positions. If this were 3 months ago, or 4 months ago, I guess now, I'd be saying I wasn't down any full-time positions. Just stuff is moving so quickly. So there are processes that we depend on that if we can't get them, we can't deliver resources to the towns.
I'm just gonna, sort of in reference to the same thing, I'm just gonna ask each of you, if you would, to talk just for a moment about response and response time during those particular time slots that you cover or that you are defaulted to.
Sure. Response for us is going to be depending on where we are and when we're available. So, there's only so many troopers, and depends on what's going on. If we have, 3 different domestics going on at the same time, it's going to be a little challenging to change stuff up and get resources. Does that frequently happen? Does it ever happen? I don't know. So, but if there's a major incident going on, obviously it stresses resources with any department. But our response is going to be depending on where the trooper is at the time. So we cover, I think it's around 1,000 square miles. So from the Mass line, 60 miles of interstate, and then we cover from Windsor out to Aleppo, down to the valley, Weston, Andover, Wyndham, Londonderry, Wardsboro, all the way down through Deerfield Valley, and down through Whitingham, and then back across to Brattleboro. So we have a very large area that we put troopers out. We assign patrol areas, so we spread the troopers out at the beginning of the shift, so we don't have them all just hanging out at one end of the patrol area to help with their response time. But again, it still could vary depending on where troopers are and what's going on.
And in that area, daylight, night, or daytime, nighttime number of troopers, just to have a sense of, in a regular shift, how many troopers would you ideally have out?
We won't go below a minimum of 5
Okay.
troopers. And typically, I guess we have gone to 4, but so that's like troopers on the road. So I'm at the office, not working the road, I'm available if something comes up, I need to come out. We also have a handful of detectives that are in the barracks during the day, typically that can come out. There is a watch commander, a lieutenant, or a captain that works nights that is available to respond if there's a critical incident going on as well. So right now, maximum number of troopers working a shift, I think has been between 8 or 10, somewhere around that.
Thank you. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Julie Winchester. We have the rods station up here that obviously we lost to arson in October. We definitely are very concerned about the safety of our community now. We just had an incident happen, not this past Thursday, but the Thursday before, where the state police actually contacted Greg to let us know somebody was stealing something off of a vehicle off of our property, and state police were not going to be able to be there for an hour and a half. So exactly what you're explaining. There was a domestic somewhere else in the state. There was, I think that night he said there was two or three that they said were available to us. So basically Greg went down and handled the situation. Obviously we lost the catalytic converter. We dealt with another customer today. They're stealing stuff. I mean, we've got that place so lit open now, it's not even funny. And we're feeling very vulnerable and not safe, honestly.
Yeah, and to respond, we can't be everywhere at once, unfortunately, and we have people that are in custody, or there's more serious incidents going on. Unfortunately, we have to deal with those incidents.
Right.
So we have to set the priority. It's not going to be perfect. It's never going to be perfect. There's never going to be enough law enforcement because, while they're stealing something in your place of business, if we were there, they'd be stealing something in Wardsboro or Londonderry or
Right, but as our town, we need to be doing something.
Right,
So
Greg Winchester, yeah.
Yes.
It just feels like there's
This is
no
part of the
cops.
conversation today too. How do we, best practices moving forward as a community? How do we look after one another?
Because the neighbor, sorry, Greg, the
Right.
neighbor called the state police, they
Yeah.
called me.
Yep,
By the time I get there, the guy's gone.
right.
But those guys, there's this big gap. Like, this is 11 o'clock on a Thursday. This isn't a Friday night at 2 in the
Yeah.
I mean, there's just,
which the
and I understand
fire
you, there's just not enough of you guys right now, but there's a big gap. Like, there's nobody in this town after 11 and it's the Wild
it's
West.
showing. It's showing, unfortunately.
Talking about 11 in the morning?
No, I'm talking about 11 o'clock at night.
And Sheriff Anderson, your area is all of Wyndham County?
So depends on, for law enforcement purposes, we contract with 13 towns.
Okay.
So while we have jurisdiction throughout the county for our statutory responsibilities, and we have jurisdiction statewide for our statewide responsibilities, we only contract with 13 towns within Wyndham County. I should say towns and villages. The combination of my patrol staff is about 4.5 full-time officers, though. I have a staff of roughly 27 people, but those are people committed to supporting the court, people committed to supporting the Agency of Human Services, and a variety of other things that are going on within Vermont and even outside of the state with extraditions and things like that. One of the things, it's an idea, it's a concept. And one of the things, hearing this, it just continues to feed towards the concept, and I can't say I have it ready to deliver to you today, though the idea is ready. Which is basically what we wanted to be moving towards, is to provide 24-hour coverage to communities of 2 to 3 towns. Right now, Putney and Westminster do have a relationship built through my office where we are serving both towns, i.e. we have a deputy either in Putney or in Westminster between ideally that period of time. And what I'd like to do is extend it 24 hours, 7 days a week. This comes back to how do you pay for it and who's interested. Vermont is, when I started my career, rough numbers, Vermont has roughly 1,300 law enforcement officers. We're down closer to 800 right now. We're projecting losing 200 officers per year and capable of training somewhere in the area of about 50. Things are not good statewide.
And that's both departments, state police, or just sheriff?
800 officers is all law enforcement in Vermont, Chittenden County,
Yes,
all the way down.
that's not,
It's not enough.
it's not a big number.
So I say this, that's the bad news. The good news is that people are having this conversation and we're talking about solutions to what we can do. I don't want a catalytic converter stolen from your business any more than the next person. That's gotta suck to tell a customer, this is what happened while at my business. I'm sorry you have to deal with that. But we also can look at this and I appreciate Karen and the select board having this meeting so we can have these discussions, this dialogue, talk about not just best practices that a homeowner or a business owner could have, but also what's the best practice at a policy level. Policing should be available, but we are a small state with limited resources. So how do we get there?
Right behind you, sorry, I don't know your name.
Oh, my name is Shannon Taney. I live in Putney. We live actually very close to Rod's. To the point where they were checking our yard for embers on the night of the fire to make sure that our house wasn't also going to catch on fire. So it's two things. The first thing is, I don't know if you guys know this, I'm sure you're aware, but when you call 911 from Putney, or if you're in Putney, you get New Hampshire 911, who then has to transfer to Vermont 911. That dispatcher then has to identify themselves to that Vermont 911, and then they ask the caller what's going on. This is from personal experience. So the time that, and this isn't really I don't want you to feel to criticize, because it's not a criticism, because based on that's why I was listening, because I didn't know those numbers. So it makes sense, I suppose. But that is something that I think really needs to be addressed. And I don't know if that's obviously your job or any connectivity, maybe it's just the networks, but that's really stressful for someone who's calling for an incident. Second comment was that when the other day after, I think it was the day after the catalytic converters were stolen the first time, I stopped for gas and I saw I have eyes open now, especially we have cameras all over our house now because of other incidents that have happened in the past on our road. And lots of them. And so when I stopped for gas, I knew that it would be quicker for me just to Facebook Messenger Julie than call 911. And I'm happy to do it. Like I didn't grow up in Putney. I grew up in a small town in the Midwest. But so we had like the neighborhood watch. This was in the 80s, 90s. So happy to do it. Gave the footage from our cameras to whoever, I forget who the investigators were, but so this best practices piece, I think it's great, but it puts a lot of expectation and pressure on the residents of a town that might expect a little bit more from the leaders and the people who are sort of trying to keep us safe. And this isn't COVID related. This is just generally like, I'm not okay letting my kids outside on their bikes by themselves ever. And we live in Putney, Vermont. I moved here from New Orleans. You know what I'm saying? Like I would be okay with them riding their bikes down there. It's just weird. So I just wanted to say those two pieces because I just think they're very related. And I knew that it would be just quicker just to message her and be like, hey, these shady people are hanging around your property and I know that this just happened. And I know who they are. I'm not going to obviously name names, but it's just frustrating to know that these are probably repeat offenders and they're just kind of, I feel like having their way with Putney right now.
So just to respond,
Go ahead. Yeah.
to the dispatch issue, that's a known issue. There's actually 50 years worth of studies that have been performed by the legislature, the Department of Public Safety, think tanks, and they all say the same thing, which is we need to start regionalizing. We are no closer to that model than we were 50 years ago. So this is a known issue. This year, I've been working with the Commissioner of Public Safety. We started this project, I think, 2 years ago, towards a few different things, including regionalization of dispatch. For a variety of reasons, that conversation has occurred. This year is probably more problematic than others. For the same reason, on the dispatch side of the house, there are critical losses in the staffing. The workload is becoming too hard, so more dispatchers become tired. and I'm oversimplifying, I don't want to say
For
that it's
sure.
just a tired dispatcher, but when you
Yeah.
handle 500 calls a day,
Yeah.
and then 2 dispatchers leave, you're now handling 550, then 600, then 750, and it's burning. This is not unique to the public safety profession. Anybody who owns a business knows it's hard to hire someone right now. Anyone working at a business knows that it's hard to work without coworkers. I mean, there is a massive issue that's far beyond me, but what I and my colleagues within the state of Vermont are working on is trying to put some of these solutions that we've known are supposed to be what they should be. We have models that work in parts of the country. We're trying to bring them here to Vermont. That requires help and guidance from the legislature. This requires stakeholders to be willing to engage. It also requires resources. So,
Can I just also add that a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about, with rods being the exception because that's the most recent, everything I'm talking about is pre-COVID. So the issues that have been circulating around our road and in the town of Putney and with certain, I don't want to say certain groups, but like just certain things that have been happening, incidents, domestic or otherwise, were pre-COVID, like 2018, 2017, 2018, 2019. So I just don't want COVID to get blamed for all the things, because that's not 100% fair, because I think a lot of this was happening before the world imploded and COVID started happening and sort of ruined everything. So I just wanted to make sure that that was clear, that I was referring to things, and I don't envy your job. I don't even know how many dispatchers you have total. I know that there's a lack, and that is a really stressful job. So I don't want anyone to feel like I'm criticizing or saying like, why don't you have more dispatchers? Like, it's not that easy. It's not that simple. So I just wanted to say it's not simply COVID that's to blame for all of this, because a lot of this was happening before COVID started.
Just to clarify, the 911 call you mentioned goes to New Hampshire, that's on a cell phone that you're referring to.
Correct. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so if you call 911 from your residence, it will go to Vermont 911.
Yeah.
and the reason for that is the cell phone towers in New Hampshire, so that's why it routes through.
Because we're so close. I know, across the river.
So
But
could-
still.
You said there's models in other parts of the country that are working, and obviously those models are better staffed and they have more money, but what are the things you could tell us that we might have to look forward to try to fill this gap?
So, where to begin? Vermont has scaled up an operation that has become so complex that a single dispatch center could be responsible for 100 agencies or more. Now, we can look at a city like Boston, which has more people than the entire state of Vermont, but they're dispatching for 3 agencies. So there's, if nothing else, bureaucratic issues just through the complexity of, well, this fire chief said this EMS chief said this, and this police chief said that. So that is but one reason. We have focused on models where, because often, the select board, I don't think this is a surprise, the select board isn't empowered with much from the state of Vermont.
Right.
Roads are a big one, wastewater. You're permitted to do certain things, but you're not like wholly responsible for it. And so the current creation of policing or dispatching, a lot of it in some part focuses at the state level and how that's pushed down to the towns, which we look at as hallelujah because we don't have to pay for it, except we do, but we don't see it coming out of the tax at the town level. So with regionalization, we're trying to identify ways that we can bring in the services into, my preference would be a single call center. If you have fire, EMS, and law enforcement dispatched out of the same center, and I would even advocate for mental health resources such as a suicide hotline or even just a social worker, but put all of them in the same room to the point of you hit 911 in New Hampshire, at least if once you got carried over to 911 in Vermont, you got 4 people of the same profession all able to start dispatching resources.
Got it.
You could have dispatch right now, you could be in touch with anywhere from 1 to 5 different dispatch centers if you called 911. And that's just the nature of the infrastructure. But this is through the Enhanced 911 board that's operated by the state. This is through, a variety of complexities that have just grown beyond scale over time. The good news is this is all doable, and we have people who know this profession, who are working on it actively, been working on it for a variety of years. We have plans, we have ways forward, and now better than ever, we have COVID funding.
Right.
It's actually providing the infrastructure that we would need to be able to stand a lot of this up. We talk about a dispatch center. This isn't just who's picking up the phone. Yeah, that's hard to hire someone right now. We were having the same problems with hiring 10 years ago. I mean, law enforcement staffing has been an issue for a while. It's compounded now with COVID, but it cost me about $250,000 to $1 million to put up a new repeater site. So how do I start talking to the Deerfield Valley if I don't have a radio tower there? We just can't. So there's these conversations that require licensing from the federal government, funding, engineering, to extend these services when the state has provided many of those through the Department of Public Safety over years. But why should the Department of Public Safety be responsible for dispatching, say, the Windham County Sheriff? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't scale well. And it's unfair for them to be in that position, but it's how the system's evolved over 50 years.
Can I get either or both of you to comment on, I totally agree, because we've had this conversation, and I had it with your predecessor many times, that finding personnel is challenging and funding is challenging, et cetera. I'm wondering, the lack of person power these days, is it largely related to monetary, or is it an economic problem, or is it a people problem? And what are the solutions for that over time? I mean, obviously that's a big question as well. But I know with your office, Mark, that, you don't get a lot of funding through the state. And the contract, that means you have to work to get contracts, et cetera. VSP is obviously a completely different model, but also understaffed. Like, what's the pinch point with this? I mean, if we've gone from 1,300 to 800 and we're still heading that direction, how do we turn that around? Is it a matter of, COVID funding might help with that, but from the sounds of it, only to the tune of 50 people a year or something, So
part of the problem on the training side has been that the academy is constrained by its structure. They can only host up to 50 people in any given certification class. So Vermont has 2 certification programs right now. One's what we call level 2 certification, one's a level 3 certification. What that affects, I'm gonna simplify it and say we have the associate's degree and the bachelor's degree.
right.
The bachelor's degree, we can run, it's a 16-hour or 16-week course that runs twice a year. What happened with COVID is that reduced numbers to about 25, just for spacing purposes. And it also started shifting a lot of resources because as people get sick, we're delaying classes, we have to push everything in the schedule to the right. The level 2 course is a 2-week in residence academy followed by hands-on training in the field. Well, the Vermont Criminal Justice Council, who oversees the training program, is currently, I'll say talking about, I don't want to advocate that they have a direction, a plan itself. I'm not here representing them. I'm a member of the council though. We've had discussions about how do we fix this problem. Here's big number, here's little number, how do we move it? Training and recruiting go hand in hand. Retention goes hand in hand. They're different causes, there's different reasons for all of this to occur, but they all go hand in hand. There's been significant transition at the academy with the leadership. The executive director has since left. We've now hired a new deputy director. We just stood up an entire professional regulation branch. So there's a lot of different resources that are coming in through the reform conversations, and a lot of really good things that are happening as a result of this. But it takes time to make sure we do it right. And what we want to do is be able to create a system that allows us to get more officers on the road to get us back to full staffing. I can go way more technical, but I also don't want to bore anyone.
Laura, go ahead.
It's just it's hard to hear you back there when you're facing front. You said that the academy is constrained by space?
Yeah.
Okay. Rather than staff?
constrained by that as well, but space is a primary component.
Okay, thank you very much. I just
Well,
missed that.
Louise, sorry, I have to leave in just a minute because I have a conflict. I want to highlight one other thing and then I've got to run, and I apologize. I will be following up and watching. We also have somebody online who's unidentified. But I also just want to quickly remind people in Putney that as it is right now, historically we've been paying about $82,000 a year for our contract with the Sheriff's Department for 40 hours a week. To have 24/7, that's 168 hours a week. Our increase proposed for not the coming fiscal year, but the year after, which we're budgeting for, is up to, what's the total number on that?
It was 86.
86, 89, somewhere in that range. So, upper $80,000 for daytime coverage, 40 hours a week. And again, there's 168 hours in a week. So, if we were looking at around the clock coverage at anywhere the level that we have even now, even though it feels sometimes like that's enough, they're just huge numbers, whether you're looking at us or Mark's budget or VSP. I mean, all of these are common. We don't pay directly for service from the state police, but that funding has to come from somewhere if there's the expected coverage. So, and I apologize, I have to leave, but I will be watching this, and this is a really important conversation. Thank you all for being here, and
Here we go.
whoever's gonna sign on. And thank you both for being here.
My pleasure.
When you're ready.
Louise.
I'll see you tomorrow.
If you could just walk me through a typical day. I'm curious how much of your day is spent with the sheriffs under you. With patrolling, how much with traffic stops, what other pieces, just so we kind of know where you might be when you get a call.
So
Like preventative stuff is what I'm thinking with the patrolling question.
I'm going to speak specifically to Putney and Westminster because those are relatively similar contracts. I previously had a contract that was as simple as all you do is stop cars, you don't respond to calls for service, you don't do anything. It was with a small village that they just had issues with ski traffic speeding. And the town provided its law enforcement services, so the village didn't care about responding to calls, the town took care of that. So we are incredibly flexible and customizing in our contracts. I think I need to say that first. Putney and Westminster, when we are present, we are providing full service coverage. We notify the state police barracks that we are in town, that we will accept the 911 phone calls and respond to issues when we are here. If we are not here for some reason, sickness, vacation time, tied up on another call, whatever those things could be, then the state police dispatch will be notified of those shortages so that they would retain the 911 call. My deputy who starts, I'm gonna talk as if I have two deputies working. As of right now, I have one who's working the 12-hour shifts or 16-hour shifts. One would start the shift at, I think it's 7 a.m. They would notify the state police dispatch. They would respond to any calls that have come in that we have pending within our dispatch center that are non-emergency. Things like that could be an abandoned vehicle. It could be you need an inspection of your vehicle's identification number for the purpose of registration. It could be a late report of a theft. A catalytic converter was stolen, no one's around, we just walked out, the car's beat up, and there it is. So those things will be handled initially. We provide presence in target areas such as school zones, areas where businesses are, maybe area where kids are playing on the street if we're aware that there's an issue there. So those are all things we would do proactively as we're able. There's also follow-up to investigations that are occurring. So let's say that the catalytic converter theft, we're told that it's Bill and Bob. We might start looking into those reports. They may be nothing, they may be something. And so we start developing evidence off of those. We could be writing reports, which is where we're documenting all the information that we're trying to capture so that maybe I don't know anything about Bill and Bob, but then Lieutenant French's trooper stops Bill, who's taking the catalytic converter off of the vehicle, and he says, hey, Windham County also dealt with a complaint that tied into Bill and Bob, and maybe we can tie that into a larger case. That's the short version. Does that answer your question enough?
Oh, no, thanks.
Sure, I don't know your name, but
Tom DeShays here. I'm just curious if you might have data to show, like, maybe over 10 years or maybe more, has crime increased or maybe calls, we'll call it maybe, have they increased in this area? Oh, we have that.
Call volume is
Oh.
here,
Okay,
That's call volume?
yes.
Okay.
so that's over,
So it's
I'm sorry, can
2008.
you want me to move?
no, it's not the
Anyway.
poll. It's the poll,
How
yeah.
does that work?
So,
Oh, I see.
okay, so it's,
So 2018, 19, 20, and 21, Vermont State Police, Wyndham County Sheriff's Office over there.
oh, I see. So the sheriff's office is going down, well, they both kind of went down.
Well, they both kind of went down, maybe based on COVID.
So
What
Do you
about a
wanna-
longer
yeah,
period
okay.
of time?
I was wondering if you wanted to speak to
for
that.
the
Yeah.
state police, the 2021 stats, I think I ran them in October maybe.
Yeah.
So that doesn't include November, December. So those numbers are going to be two months short.
Uh-huh.
2020, our great COVID year, we don't want to blame stuff on COVID, but stats went down during COVID.
Interesting.
Significantly. So, you know, it's hard to say that, you know, what the trend is when you have a pandemic going on.
Yeah.
But yeah, it did.
Have you seen any kind of different changes over a longer period of time? This is only since 2018, but I'm thinking,
I'd have to run them. I wouldn't know off the top of my head.
and have we changed our sort of our contract with the sheriff's department, let's say, how many hours we get over this period?
So the yes and no. So I'm going to second what Lieutenant French said, which is the pandemic. There's so many variables that changed.
Yep.
We can't really point a finger at anything. I can give you about 5 theories. They might all be wrong. And there are going to be researchers with PhDs who are going to be looking at 2020, 2021, probably 10 years from now. So to the point of what's the cost in reductions, I can point out a couple policies that happened in my department, such as we stopped supporting fire departments on rescue calls unless they specifically requested us. There were times where we would self-activate because we know, like, hey, they need a lift assist, and a volunteer might show up at the facility,
Yeah.
but you need 2 people for the lift assist, and we could be that second person. So it could provide a quicker response. We cut those non-essential responses to medical calls unless we were specifically requested. We notified all the agencies that that's what we were doing because our goal was to provide less contact with a bunch of people unless we needed to. So there are things that happen such as that. These are call
Sorry,
volume.
has that happened since by 2020, you mean? When did you start separating yourself from the?
Roughly March
first
13th,
responders?
2020.
Oh, okay, all right.
So I say roughly because I know that's the day the executive order from the governor came out. I'm not sure if that's the exact day our policy went out, but it started becoming this very active conversation of who wants us at their places. Public speaking events, those would be captured in call volume. We weren't doing public speaking events because there was no public to speak to other than on Zoom. So those things do happen, and those would be affected by volume. But to the question of crime, going back, I don't remember the numbers concretely because this is probably October timeframe that we ran these, or I should say that we initially ran them. But I also looked at crime, and Vermont's been seeing a trend that's also consistent with a national trend, which is a reduction in violent crime. So we did see that. I didn't bring those numbers today because I didn't think we'd be speaking about it. But at the end of the day, we have seen a reduction in violent crime. That's all available through the FBI's website. It's also published on state websites through the is it Vermont Crime Information Center, or is that a different group that's publishing it now?
I'm not sure where it is.
Okay.
I imagine WCSO probably publishes.
So there are public sources available with data. You're not going to see anything, I don't think, for 2021 yet, because it still has to be processed through the various places it goes. But we can pull it from our side, which we can pull to the minute. So good news is we are seeing those reductions.
That's in violent crime. Does that include, like, how do you separate out sort of like just call for break-ins and things like, or is that considered violent crime?
So there's what's called the Uniform Crime Report, which tracks violent crime as what's, I'm going to get the terms wrong, but basically there's 2 tiers. Tier 1 is violent crime. Tier 2 are the other crimes that we track nationally. Vermont reports those at the statewide level through the Vermont Crime Information Center, which is why I think that they're the place that has the data. And again, that's known as the Uniform Crime Report. So that is tracked through the FBI. It's reported out. It's available nationally. It's also available at the state level.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
So there's first of all,
There's
there's
a
one
hand up.
person with a hand up, and I also noticed that we have our two representatives,
Right.
Mike Murphy and Senator White, and I was wondering if either one of them would like to weigh in.
The person with their hand up needs to identify themselves,
Yeah,
don't
the
they?
person with their hand up, could you please identify yourself?
This is Elizabeth Warner.
Okay, go ahead, Elizabeth. Did you have a question?
I wanted to build on, yes, absolutely. That's why I've been on for a while with my hand up. So I have some concerns regarding the overall collaboration with the state troopers and the sheriffs, and I come up with some interesting ideas that I thought the town might. Why not have all of the towns that feed into the Wyndham Southeast Supervisory Union put money into a pool to sort of grow our law enforcement and resources as a more expanded community where there could be sort of a main base, where there's more social workers, there's more respondents, and more collaboration. Since we're already feeding money to the Wyndham Southeast Supervisory Union, that was why I just kind of identified the towns that are part of that. Since we're already sending money into sort of a pooled group for resources, could we look at some kind of a pooled resource for law enforcement?
Mark, that's what you were talking about, regionalizing counties, correct?
Correct.
Yeah,
And
I just think it's a great way for us to expand the resources, have more collaboration, and support the communities, more, significantly, because there'd be better relationships. So, I've found there isn't enough communication with your two organizations right now. So I agree that these better systems in place could really support that. But having all of the surrounding towns around Brattleboro, Wyndham County sort of pouring money into an overall law enforcement fund to support our, our safety, security, mental health might be a more cost-effective way to look at it.
Is that something?
And benefit us all.
Is that something you'd like to respond to? I think maybe Mike could respond to that. Mike, you're on this, aren't you?
I am, thanks, and Jeanette is here as well. And I think Jeanette could speak to this a little bit more because of an idea to start creating a really connected statewide system. And the problem is we don't have one right now. We have a system where the state police and the sheriffs and the towns that have police aren't structurally connected. And there is an idea, one of the ideas the governor has is to create an agency of public safety that would bring all of that in one department. The challenge to the suggestion there is that you might have a hard time getting all the towns to buy into this. And the reality is that as life is changing, and if we want those services, we're going to have to pay for them. Mm-hmm. And that is going to be a cultural shift to get a lot of people to understand whether we're going to have to start paying for more fire coverage, police coverage. It's going to cost some more money. And we do have an opportunity right now with some federal COVID money coming to town. But in the long run, if we want the services, we're going to have to pay for them. And I'll pass it over to Jeanette, though. But in terms of the dispatch system, Mark does have a plan that he would like to coordinate around the county. But again, it's going to cost a lot of money. It would be long-term beneficial to everyone. But at some point, we can get state money, but it's going to have to come locally too. So, Jeanette?
Thank you. May I address you, Putney Select Board?
Please.
Okay, thank you. So I have been working on this issue for many, many years. I chair Senate Government Operations, and law enforcement and EMS services and fire services are within our purview. It is a very, very complicated system. And it's complicated even more because we have local control in Vermont. So we, as Mike said, I have been working with the sheriff and with the Commissioner of Public Safety around how we solve this problem. And I do believe that a regional approach is the way to do it. So there are a couple different things that we're talking about here. One is regional dispatch that might include fire, EMS, and law enforcement. That's one issue. Then there's the issue of law enforcement coverage on a regional basis and how we do that. And I don't want to go into kind of the weeds here because it's very complicated, but the way my guess is that ultimately what's going to happen is that if we want to have towns having coverage, we're going to have some kind of a county tax to support the sheriff's office. Because right now the sheriff's offices get no money for coverage, only through the contracts. And when you have a contract, the towns with either their own police departments or with contracts are subsidizing the other towns, because Putney is, for example, paying for some coverage from the sheriff's office, but it's also, the residents are also paying for their state taxes, which funds the state police. So those towns that don't have a contract, Putney residents are subsidizing the state police to come out and cover them. So it is a very, very complicated issue, and I think that we really need, we've been addressing it for a long time, and I think that the sheriff, he has some pretty exciting ideas on how we can do this, but it's going to take, as Mike said, it's going to mean that people are going to have to pay for it. That's the ultimate answer. People in Brattleboro, for example, towns that have their own police department are paying on an average about $300 a person for their police departments. That means they are paying that. They are then also subsidizing Putney because we only contract for a small amount of time, and then we depend on the state police for the rest of the coverage. So Brattleboro residents are subsidizing that, and then towns that don't have any contracts, they're completely subsidizing them for the state police coverage. So it is very complicated, and I'm be willing to talk in more detail about this, but I think that this is not the particular time to go into that detail. But I do agree that what needs to happen is regional dispatch services and regional law enforcement services. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm wondering if there's any, I'm Louise Garfield again. I'm wondering if there's any breakdown on any of these calls, either by categories or parts of town, or if we wanted to look at those at some point. And did you say this is
Yes,
just Putney
we do
or
have
Putney Westminster?
Those are just Putney for mine.
That's what I thought.
Yes.
So, yeah, are they broken down?
Yes.
Ways that we could explore it in other
As
towns?
far as the state police goes, we have them broken down by specific call. So for example, DUI, larceny, burglary, assault, that type of stuff. However, I did, when I realized it earlier this evening when we ran the stats, it was November to November for the given year. So it's not perfectly on the year. But, I do have those numbers. It's kind of daunting. It's not very exciting.
And then,
Parts of town or repeats.
I don't have it as far as parts of town. That'd be very complicated to run. I will say that these stats for us, the numbers do not include the interstate. I was able to take the interstate out of there because we get a lot of calls on the interstate, and I knew that you probably didn't want to hear about those. As far as parts of town goes, we'd have to run it by each street or address section separately. That would be very complicated and time consuming. And then what does that mean? You have a certain street address with so many calls in a different street with a different number of calls, but you'd have to figure out how many people live on the street, and is that a main street? Are we getting crashes on that street? Why are we getting more calls? So that'd be way too complicated, and I don't really think we're going to get anything out of that.
So some of us live or work in the more densely packed village, so I'm just curious how many calls might come from the village and how many from the hills.
Yeah, again, that would be a little more complicated to run.
so for my data, I'll say we are able to break it down by call type. We are also able to break it down. Not all these are crimes. I do want to be clear that's not representative of crime. It is inclusive of crime because all of our crimes are captured in calls as well. The important thing, as Lieutenant French has said, is that we need to make sure that we do balance relevant factors. And so concentration or density of population, the hill towns versus the village, those certainly have an effect. The businesses that may be present simply by nature of the volume of business that occurs there. So say the general store, as a business, it probably has a lot of people come. Rods, gas pumps, a lot of people come. Whereas Basketville might not have as many people coming anymore because they have transitioned their business model. So there can be factors that make it harder to control for. That said, we have a software system that does allow us to accomplish two things. One is pull data by street individually through a single query, so it doesn't take as much work. Or the second is what's called a heat map, which would then basically try and compound the data that we have to say where are we seeing crime occur. The heat map is a little bit harder. It requires analytical software. We're hoping our software vendor provides heat maps in the future. Right now, that's not provided through the suite we have. So it's possible, but I don't currently have the technology on the heat map.
So I wanted to speak to that just for a second. Karen just handed me two documents here, and they do give a breakdown of the different description of each call here in Putney, and I think Louise could get this information if she wants.
She can contact
You
me.
can contact her, and so I don't think it will, I think he already gave you more information than this is going to give you, but it's here if you want to look at it.
Thank you,
So,
Bob.
yep, sure.
Can I
Do you
make
have
a
another
comment?
person?
Sure, please, Karen.
So every month we get a report from the sheriff's department on the calls. That's public information as well. So anyone can come in and look at the reports for the last 3 years. And I've invited people to do that. So if anyone's interested, they can reach out to me and I'll make them available.
Did you have something?
There's another hand up, and we have an iPhone and an iPhone 2, and I apologize, we can't, I think that's well, just so you know, we see a big tile of people, so it's hard for us to identify people.
Okay, did I?
So Elizabeth has.
Elizabeth, you have your hand up. You're muted.
You're muted.
Unmute yourself.
You're muted,
You're
Elizabeth.
muted, Elizabeth.
Which Elizabeth is it?
I'm sorry, so much technology on my phone. It's Elizabeth Warner, and I just was wanting to, again, bring up the public records. You can get address by address if you request them, and we have done, had some research done on the public records, and My concern is that there are some organizations that are using way more services in the town, and maybe there should be some type of fee associated if you're, you have to pay more in or something. Like if we're looking at endless calls to certain locations, perhaps there's some kind of financial contribution that needs to be made.
I don't know how you would do that, but
Actually, my point is to that as well.
Well, you can track the calls to the different locations, and you can say, wow, over this much time, this much of our resources has been used.
I'm out of my depth in that, but do you want to speak to that?
It's
either?
simple, Nick.
The only thing I'd say, I mean, if I hate to call them out by name, Landmark. I mean, Landmark is here. We know that there's a large population present from Landmark, and I'm not saying that we have identified an issue with Landmark. But that said, we might be able to control for an organization like Landmark because they own a square a footprint of land that has its own 911 addressing.
I see.
But that said, I can have non-Landmark related stuff occur at Landmark, and it does happen.
Right.
Got it.
So we can't go by sheer quantitative numbers to do that. But I also think that things like that are already accomplished through, I think the town, and someone from the town will be able to correct me here. I believe you have an emergency services fund that is contributed to by organizations like Landmark and other schools who we anticipate some level of service, and I think that does offset
Yes.
emergency services.
Yes.
So there might be a construct already in existence, and so we might be reinventing a wheel.
Got it. Got it.
Well, maybe that needs to extend out to larger organizations that are, really creating and bringing more issues into town, because it's very difficult for a lot of the people who are on fixed incomes, especially in the village, to come up with yet more money for taxes.
So that's.
So
that's
it's spreading the cost out where the demand is most recognized.
Karen, you had a comment.
Yes, so that's, we call those impact fees, Elizabeth. And,
Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah.
There's a need for it.
Yeah, so for any large projects that are, built in town, and this is a zoning thing and it's not policing, so we don't want to stray off from our guest here and questions about policing. So we can talk about that in a regular select board meeting.
Okay.
Okay, I just keep hearing Landmark come up, and I think there's some other name that could be also
I think that was
presented.
I think that was an arbitrary reference. He was just using it. It wasn't.
Right.
It
It's
wasn't
been
actually-
referenced multiple times whenever
I think-
these types of
please.
meetings have come up. Landmark is always what's thrown up in the air as the name. So I think that it's more than that.
Okay, I think we're talking about funding structures, and that's not why we're here. So I agree that we should be
Right.
focusing on the issue at hand, and we can talk about this at a future select board meeting.
I agree with that. Well done, Irene. Thank you.
This young lady.
Okay.
Yes, please.
So, slightly piggybacking, but not completely. But I had the same kind of thought. We were talking about regionalizing, and this is sort of the same thing. And I'm sure it's been thought about, but again, as a former resident of a Wyndham Windsor Housing Trust property, knowing that they're looking to build another one, I think that might potentially be what a lot of folks in Putney are concerned about. Not just affordable housing brings criminals. That's not at all what I'm saying at all, because I'm not a criminal and I used to live in Putney Landing. I think the one thing that I was actually wondering before Elizabeth said anything, and I wrote it down, do organizations or businesses like that who are building into the community that already exists, are they beholden, like, are they contributing more than, say, Rods or, the average citizen who has to pay taxes on their property? Like, because they're bringing traffic, they're bringing more cell phones, they're bringing, so traffic in like phones, and then traffic as in cars and people and congestion and just all the things that come with, even if it was affordable housing, it doesn't matter, it's another complex. So I would be wondering if that is another funding resource that you guys could even think about or talk about, because, and I do think what Elizabeth is saying is actually related to what we're talking about, because from personal experience and from being in this town and living in Windham County for 14 years of my life, and only being in Putney for 5 of those years, I have experienced more crime and more incidents and more issues in this town since I've lived in Putney than anywhere else I've ever lived in Vermont and New Orleans. And that's kind of says a lot, just knowing, having spoken to people who've lived here all their lives or grew up here or have families who have businesses who have been here for 50 some odd years. So they are related, and I don't want because someone said landmark for everyone to focus on that, because the issue is not college students, it's the community as a whole and who's building into that community, who's bringing traffic in every sense of the word through Putney and through residences, people like folks like me who live in the village and who are really concerned about the safety of specifically my family and our neighbors who are being tremendously affected by the fire at Rods, the catalytic converters. I stop for gas and I'm wondering if I should lock my car doors because my kids are in the car. These are very real things of the day to day, and I know you guys live here too, but that needs to be stated on a public record somewhere, because it's really incredibly important for everyone to understand. This isn't just, we need more cops. We need more patrols. We need for you to not transfer us to New Hampshire first. This is very real. I wake up in the morning and wonder what's going to happen today. And the first thing I do before I take my kids to school in the morning is check my cameras. That sucks.
Well, you have cameras, and that's a positive thing, because
out of my own pocket because our landlord refuses.
And I get that, and we're all concerned, and that's part of the reason we're all here. Is how do we protect our neighborhoods, knowing that we have emergency services that are strapped because they have no staffing, they have no financial support, other than being tax based, and it hurts everybody, and everybody's looking around going, what is happening? And
we've put
how
things
do
no
we
trespass orders on our property and things like that. It does not deter
No, we
anything.
understand, and
So
we're
we're
listening
trying.
and we hear everyone,
Yeah.
but we all need to work together.
Yeah.
And, no.
It's
Yeah,
a
we
really
do.
complex issue. He said that right from the beginning. He said that too.
I
We know it's
understand
really complex, and this is a piece of it. You're right.
Right.
And
It's
the
in a big,
meeting
important
tonight was
piece.
about law enforcement. And
Yeah.
you're right. It all needs to be talked about at some point. But it's so complex right now, and we have these two people here to answer.
That's why I'm saying it in
They're
front
part
of
of
them,
it.
because
So
they know for
so
sure
if we could
the trouble
stay
that Putney Landing
focused
has brought to
on
Putney
that,
as a
that would
town.
be really good for this meeting.
100%.
Okay.
I guarantee a
thank
lot of
you.
those numbers are from Putney
So
Landing.
we can't, don't call out.
I will call it out to the
Communities.
day I die because I lived there for 3 years and it was a nightmare. I've
Julie.
lived in Putney.
I'm
for-
just wondering, obviously Greg has been
Appreciate that
raised
getting
in
cut
this
off.
town. And when I grew up in Halifax, so again, we're talking very small communities. What happened to the idea of a constable, or back in the day when he's a teenager, there was policing 24 hours here. And we didn't have the issues in this town that we're having now, but so what about an idea of that as a town, why can't we do something like a constable? I don't even know what they would be called, if that's even a word
No.
still.
Constable's right. When we had Henry Farnham, there you go.
Yeah.
And he knew he had the experience, he knew the community, he knew the people, and it worked. And we've tossed around that idea too of a constable.
If we're spending $82,000 a year for 40 hours a week, I don't know, that's a good chunk of change for
we
a lifestyle.
We couldn't even get an animal control officer.
Right.
It's
So-
very difficult right
Right,
There's
so
another
again, there's a
issue.
huge shortage, I get that too, that's a whole separate issue that we have, is the shortage. But is that the day and age that we're also heading of this police, which is horrible, a police shortage, it can't all fall on you guys anymore. I don't think that. So I think as a town, what are some other options that we could be considering to keep our community safe, to keep our buildings safe, to
That's
keep
the
our
question.
children safe?
That's the question.
So a couple things.
Do you want to respond? Yeah.
First off, specific to constables, part of the problem with constables, it's not the individuals themselves, it's that law enforcement is a high liability area. If you read Vermont law, there are very many portions that are from the 1960s and the 1970s that would not survive in civil rights claims and whatnot these days. So there's a lot of administration and control that's developed. And with constables, it's kind of the police chief and the officer all in one. And so with that, we know through psychology that supervision of people is more effective if you're not the one performing the activity itself. And so we see a gain of control for professional policing as we add supervision from an outside perspective. The second part to the constable thing, though, is that we're pulling from the same pool of resources because they have to have the same training that everybody else has. And so if we run into the clog in the pipe of the training pipeline, then we're going to have the same problem anyway. So I don't think a constable is necessarily the right issue. It's right for some communities, but again, it's usually you have Henry Farnham, who he's been a police officer for 40 years, and he's in the backyard, and it works.
And from the community and knows the people,
everyone.
lay the land, and all that, has relationships set up, all
And
that.
then what
So-
are the security like at Hannaford's? That person that's standing outside of the. I'm serious because we're thinking of hiring somebody to literally sit at our shop. That's how bad it's gotten.
Yeah.
So I don't know who the security at Hannaford's is, but certainly private security is something that could be considered. They won't have powers of arrest because you have to have law enforcement authority to do that. So to that point, they may be a deterrent, but it might not be. It might be no different than somebody messaging you on Messenger saying this is happening, and you get there and you do what you do. One of the things that occurred back in the 80s and the 90s, and it's kind of tapered away with social media, in its construct itself, were neighborhood watches.
Right.
This is, I mean, we're having the same conversation that we are having right now.
Called me. Is that considered neighborhood watch? Because again, our neighborhood has to sleep. Like,
Yes.
I mean, we have people offering to sit down at the shop round clock, and I don't even feel right being like, yeah, sure, come and sit. I don't know.
So if you look at communities in like Florida, neighborhood watch is like an organized group of volunteers who will patrol. But we're also talking about a population that is 5, 10, 20 times larger than what we're dealing with in our communities.
Yeah, but we're dealing with some big stuff here.
But what we've also realized with social media is that we already, part of the reason neighborhood watches themselves, the formal organizations, have disappeared is social media. People are connecting through different platforms that are helping them connect. So a message was quicker than something else. We've been seeing that, and they've been forming naturally, which is a good thing. Developing community helps develop that level of trust, looking out for each other. How do we deal with this? And in the past, we've supported developing social media groups to do that, both here in town and in other communities. They operate for several years, and then they start to disband. People start to become less familiar with each other, whatever it may be. But one of the things I'm really most grateful for is that we're having this meeting right now. Because this is one step towards building that community. And community is really what's going to help us reduce crime. So my office practices what's called the community policing model, which says I'm not here to solve all the crime in the world. I'm paid to do it. I have professional training in it, but I'm working with you. If it's just Mark is going to go take care of it, Greg's going to fix the car, someone else is going to fix the bones and all these different things. Well, what happens when we need more hands? A doctor can't solve all the problems. A mechanic can't fix all the problems. I mean, we have to work together and collectively. So this is part of an ecosystem that we help nurture and help build to strengthen our own communities.
I like that, and that segues really nicely into the second part here of best practices moving forward. And so speaking to people who aren't in law enforcement but need it here in this community, what would you have to offer about that? What you just said was great, and so how would we participate in that? You know, what's our part?
Sure. So I'll start off with when you see something, say something. I mean, it's cliche, but there's a reason that it's cliche. Public safety agencies have been investing a lot of money in marketing to say, if you see something, say something. And thank God you said something.
Yeah.
I mean, that's part of it. Reporting information to us, people get frustrated because they say, well, I called, but they did nothing. There's a lot that goes on behind the scenes that we're not allowed to talk about. There's a lot that does become accessible through public records, but I mean, at the end of the day, this is where we are working together to develop trust with the community to say we're trying to work on it. So catalytic converter thefts, it's become it's a major issue. I mean, to the point that the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office has committed resources, because we're talking about millions of dollars of resources stolen in New England. This isn't just a Putney problem. This is happening across the state of Vermont. We've dealt with people stealing catalytic converters. We've dealt with burglars. So what can you do? Communication and community, developing a circle of trust. Is there a social media group here in Putney?
Yeah.
I Love Putney?
Yeah.
I'm not here to advocate that the I Love Putney group is the group,
Porch forums.
but there are groups that you can put together if they don't already exist. Front Porch Forum. I'm on the Front Porch Forum in Brattleboro. And I've had people reach out to me via Front Porch Forum, and it's like, okay, here's a way to access the sheriff. That's great. But working together as groups, hey, we know that you have cameras at your house.
Right.
Well, I know that there was an issue near your house. They drove by at 2:30. Maybe it's on your camera, and then that might be something that can be passed on to one of my deputies who can say, oh, there's the car. Who's that? It's Bill. Hey, the state police just arrested Bill. Let's go talk to him.
Yeah.
We have them in the area. So building up these communication networks is one of the most effective assets we have. I mean, we can talk about things like burglaries. I can give you a bunch of advice on burglaries. I've given this advice to many towns, so there's also recordings if you'd rather not talk about it now. We can talk about domestic violence. We can talk about sexual abuse. We can talk about child abuse. There's a lot of things we can talk about. I need to know from you what you want to talk about.
Is there someone behind me? Oh.
Yeah, she did.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, yeah.
Actually, she's had her hand up for a while.
Senator White reminded me of my manners. May I address the select
Please,
board?
please do, yes.
Oh, sorry, is that a thing?
Thank you. I heard the word arrest, and I was wondering with all these calls, what fraction of calls result in arrest? But I don't expect an answer right now. I just want to point out that I'm assuming on this terrible schedule and understaffing situation, circumstances that you're in, you still maintain contact with the corrections departments and the courts, do you not? Or isn't that part of what we're talking about tonight? Because just in brief, after 2 years of unremitting unlawful mischief and vandalism, an arrest was made near where I live, and there seems to be a breakdown between that arrest and the filing of citations, and that lead to the arraignment, that lead to the control of this behavior, which is very frightening and very damaging, and I've recently learned a lot by calling the state's attorney's office, because Department of Corrections, which is very helpful, had no current information. The court had no current information, but the state's attorney's office had current information, which is that a citation had not been filed timely, and so a recite had been requested, and the arresting officer doesn't have to write it, but it's still not coming in. So we know the courts are in similar circumstances to your own, but things just sort of, my perception is they sort of break down the whole process of working towards a resolution. And I just was wondering if you could talk about how much of your time goes to courts, Department of Corrections, making arrests, writing citations, all that sort of stuff. And if that is put at risk too by your, as I assume it is, by your lack of staff.
So there is a justice system-wide staffing issue. That can be from courts to the correction system. There are issues with COVID. The jail in St. John, or I should say the prison in St. Johnsbury, just closed to any new intakes because of COVID. And a lot happened in the last 2 years that really slowed things down. I don't think we've had more than maybe a half dozen trials in the state of Vermont, because we have courtrooms that don't have ventilation systems, so we can't put juries in at risk of challenging someone's health. So these are all issues that take time, and the solutions are being worked towards. I just met with the judiciary, and this isn't anything special to me. They're meeting with other people. I just met with them earlier this week about one possible solution while we try to get an HVAC system installed in Windham County, in the courthouse in Newfield specifically. That would be civil court. It wouldn't quite affect criminal stuff, but people who have civil issues also have things. Landlords have a desire to pursue action against tenants who aren't paying for their rent. I mean, they also are frustrated by these things. There is system-wide stress. We're working through it. This is like there's molasses, and we have to get through the puddle of molasses. Eventually, there is a light at the end of the tunnel, but at the end of the day, we do have to still travel through the puddle of molasses. So things are slow. There are constraints. But there's a lot of really engaged people trying to solve these issues in their various wheelhouses.
I'd like to make a comment right now that clearly people are frustrated for good reason. Clearly. That's why we're here. We're glad you're here. We're glad we're talking about this. This is not going to be simple, and it's not going to be quick. And it's important that we don't turn on each other in this process. You might have a really good idea about something. You might have a really good idea about something. All of you might, and it's all got to work together so that it all works. And so it's important that we remember that we're working together, like Karen was saying before, like he just said. And I know I'd like to hear any input you might have about best practices moving forward as it Vermont State Police perspective.
And to answer your question about arrests, in 2018 we had arrested 20 people in Putney. 2019 was 23. 2020 was 19. And for the partial year in 2021, it was 8.
Interesting.
I don't have the breakdown of what those arrests were for. They could be a range of, DUI, domestics, driving with a suspended license, that sort of stuff. And to get back to your point, as the sheriff mentioned, the key to this is communication. What you guys are doing is probably the most important step into the right direction going forward that you can make. The community watches, to have the contact with your neighbors, to understand what's going on in each person's neighborhood, and just to have those conversations back and forth, and even townwide, if you're using social media platforms to do that, that's probably going to help you the most. There's the simple solutions of what you can do, generally, keep your lights on, have alarm systems, set up cameras, call us if you see something suspicious, but please try to get some information to call us besides there's something suspicious. If you get someone's license plate number, that's going to give us a lot better information than a car drove away. It'll give us something to look into. Somebody mentioned, I think it was you, am I going to lock my car when I go into the gas station with my kids? Yes. I always lock my car. I'm probably a little more paranoid than everybody else, but
Well, that makes sense considering your occupation.
Yeah, I've seen that happen to a lot of people probably. So yeah, I would recommend, yes, lock your car. Does that mean someone's not going to smash your window and steal something if you have something in plain sight? Maybe not, but if someone's going through cars and your car is locked, then maybe they're not going to bother with your car, maybe not. The same with your house. If someone walks up to your house and you have a camera that's in plain view and you have outside motion sensor lights that flip on, will that deter somebody from entering your house? Maybe, maybe not. But I can tell you that most people don't like to be seen on camera and have their picture sent out on social media with all the thefts that are going around, especially when you can get a license plate and a car to throw with it. It's very helpful to us.
Good. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, hands. You got your hand up. Anyone? Oh,
Swift was.
I'm sorry, Swift. Yeah, Swift, please.
Francis with Jeopardy. Sorry, the kiddos in the background. I guess this is not necessarily a question, but more a comment and just an observation of how we can go forward. Of how we as a town can really foster and build our community. This is something that the Equity and Inclusion Committee is curious about, how, especially on this equity lens, how we can build community on that goal. But this piece in general, I think COVID has really put a huge wrench in having big events and having these community building platforms where we get to know each other and we get to build that. And I don't know what stuff of the town will have, or the police even have some advice on how to build and create more space, shared space, and it's complicated with it being winter and COVID. But there's a piece there of just, we've lost our connections with our neighbors a lot because of COVID. And Mike Berwicki and I were meeting with a small group of people, I guess it might have been 6 months ago, around just people that are on all sides of all the things, and how do we build connections there. And COVID is a big deterrent in that, because we can't actually just knock on a neighbor's door and say, like, hey, go on a walk, do you want to come? So I'm curious if there's any way in which the town, and maybe this is feeds into something we might talk about in the future, but how we can foster that and facilitate that as a town. I don't know if the police has any advice on other initiatives that have been done in other towns to foster connections, community building.
Thank you. Thank you. So, do you have anything?
Not at the moment,
Okay, all
no. I've just been listening, really.
So, please, go ahead. and then-
This is the best practices piece too, and it was just something that I had thought about just based on my experience with the dispatch and with the I Love Putney page, and sort of like, because that's not really probably the place you want to report incidents, because it's very strict on the rules and keeping everyone kind of like copacetic. And so I was wondering, and this isn't necessarily technology, but someone I'm sure listening has, like, we have the science, we have the technology to do something like reporting incidents to a platform for not emergencies, to either assist with, or instead of having a queue for the dispatchers when they come on shift in the morning, instead of having that queue of things, it could be like you can filter emails in Gmail. There has got to be a way to filter certain things, like there's a cat in a tree, or I saw a weird car on my road, versus I saw my neighbor beat the crap out of his kid. That, do you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not making light of that, because these are things that I've personally like had to kind of waver on reporting. I'm not going to call 911 if I see someone driving down Old Depot Road 45 miles an hour, because that's just someone being a douche. I'm not going to call you guys for that. But I will call if I see someone I know destroying, or not know, but like someone I don't know on my road acting shady, especially after what's been happening at Rod's and in the and Shag at Bark and just all the things, right? So there has to be a way to filter those kinds of calls or incident reports after the fact, to alleviate some of the stress and some of the pressure on the dispatchers. And so they're not reporting all these, not what you consider mundane necessarily, is not the right word, but not as urgent as something else, like a motor vehicle accident or something else more serious that you guys really need to be going to. So that was a best practices piece that I've had in my mind for a while, just because I've been really frustrated, not sure where to go. Same point as the courts are backed up like crazy, and there's really nowhere to go to get information that, or report something that you're not going to have an immediate response to anything ever right now. That's just not going to happen. So just something to think about going forward, I guess.
Just to reflect on what you just said, are you suggesting having a place that might not necessitate a response? So the car driving down Old Depot
Right.
Road at 45 miles an hour, you're not going to call them and bother us. That's the term
That's
my mom
exactly-
used when she had something
that's
a garden
exactly what
stolen from her
yeah.
house.
Yeah.
So she didn't want to bother the police. I was like, Mom,
Right.
call the police. She's like, well, I don't want to bother them. I was like, what if
Yeah.
they just stole from someone else's garage, or
Well, that's-
someone's antique vase, or whatever?
Well, because it could also
So-
be the car that was casing rods before they ran behind them and set them on fire and then ran through our backyard. Do you know what I'm saying? Like that's the kind of, that's where my mind is with this.
So
Could be something, could be nothing.
as explained, as you've explained, it doesn't quite exist. So there are things that both the Department of Public Safety and my office do have. It's just not quite as you developed the idea.
Okay.
Where you can go on my website and there's an online, hey, file a report. We would probably call you So it would be the quote unquote bothering us, but again, to what I originally said, see something, say something.
Okay.
Could we fashion it if I don't want to call back? Sure. And Lieutenant French, you have a online reporting utility as well, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend reporting stuff online
Okay.
that's of an immediate need. There could be a delay with that. We have a dispatcher that answers the phone
Mhm.
for us, and we'll take your call. I know we'll determine the priority of the call at the time, and it gets sent to the shift supervisor. If it's after hours, if it's during hours, it'll get sent directly to the trooper who's in the patrol area to determine the level of response. So as far as with us, if a call comes in, the best way is to just to call. I have seen situations where someone will do an online reporting and I'll get it a day later and it'll be something like, I saw this vehicle that was driving erratically. I think he was possibly DUI. Well, that's a missed opportunity because someone driving drunk is very dangerous. And the last thing we want to do is to have somebody reporting that online.
Right.
So,
To that, I think is what I was thinking about. I was imagining was that because then so we're calling 911, right? Then as we all know, we're on a cell phone. If we don't have a landline, which I don't know a lot of people who still have them. I know they exist. I don't have one. So a lot of people have cell phones. So you get to dispatch however you get to dispatch, right? And then you have so what I'm saying is you don't want to report online, but there should be a hub of some sort that connects the two of you or whoever else is involved, BPD if they're getting involved, I don't know. But that where you can just deposit information that you will get that doesn't have to go through what time of day is it? Is it 7 a.m.? Is someone there? Is it 10 p.m.? Is it 10:03? Is anyone there? Who do I call? VSP, Sheriff's Department? Which website do I go to report this online? That's kind of where I'm going with that. Not so much like, if there's a guy driving down the street and he's like, call 911. I mean, of course. But what I'm saying, I'm just thinking of the non-emergency stuff that could potentially lead to an arson tip or something along those lines, because it's hard to know where to go because we all know that you're so stretched so thin, but 911 isn't always the solution. So that's kind of where my mind is right now with that.
Yeah, my dispatch is not 911.
Yeah.
It is a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week call taking center.
I generalized 911, but
Well, we receive 911 calls, but a 911 operator is a separate person from a dispatcher. So you can call my office and say, hey, I just saw this, and we might say, we don't have anyone on right now. Would you like us to transfer you to the state police? And you say, no, I just want you to be aware. Yeah. We do have those centralized systems that help us share information. We have a statewide records management system that we all contribute to that has all this information. To Lieutenant French's point, the system, the preceding system was very difficult to get address by address information. You have to manually run it. Yeah. The new system, we can run all the addresses. Oh. So this just rolled out over a 12-month period that just finished. So we now have those things. And we also have Swift's baby or a child who's vocalizing, and it's wonderful.
I think they second the motion.
I think it was a second.
Your ideas are good ideas, and I think everybody's trying to move forward and implement them, and we need to hear them all. And I think it's been a really good meeting. And do you have anything?
No, but
I just wanted to ask. Yeah, I just wanted to ask if you can put on the record the phone number for the Windham County Sheriff's Office, so it's in the minutes.
I can. It's 802-365.
Oh, yeah.
4942.
That's what I always call.
Thank you.
And if you want to put that on your cell phone.
It's already in there.
So if you have anything else.
I do not. If you have any issues, follow up, please call the state police, Westminster Barracks.
Thank you.
911.
Thank you so much.
We went right into another question, and I didn't know if there was any experience you have as officers around building community in these times where, versus what you've seen in other communities. I know it's not directly police related, but this piece of when we build stronger communities, we have safer communities, and what you've seen around and what you might recommend.
You spoke to that earlier. I know you did, and I.
Swift, I'd be happy to connect with you after the meeting, maybe another day or by email, and we can talk more, because I think that there's intersections that as you've identified with Equity Inclusion Committee, that we've talked about or can talk about. I've previously come to that committee as well to discuss these types of things. So that might be a much broader conversation, if that works.
And I'm not aware of anything in particular to address your question specifically. I obviously it'd be worth reaching out to other towns more broadly to see what they're doing. I think that would be beneficial. That's probably where you're going to get some of the best ideas.
Thank you.
Yeah, even just sharing the policy, not policy, I'm not sure who's doing it, but the like meet your neighbor thing that's been done virtually. I can't remember what that's actually called.
Yeah, I think that's Next Stage. Next Stage has been doing that.
Did you get
Yeah,
that,
things
Swift?
like that.
Okay. Anyway,
He's in my son's class.
thank you. Thank you all. Thank you so much.
I read it.
I see Mike has his hand up.
I'm sorry, who does?
Mike.
Oh, Mike, I'm sorry, Mike, I didn't see you. Please, Mike.
Well, thanks, and thanks for pulling this together and for everyone that's come. You know, I just want to close by saying Mark's predecessor, Sheriff Clark, was a real pioneer in bringing social workers into police forces. And we have one, actually, the one that that Keith hired, who's now stationed at the Westminster State Police Barracks, Christine Bullard. And she is just the tops. And workers like her are how we can move from addressing situations before they escalate and police have to be called in. So that's another way that I think we can continue to move forward in changing how we do policing. Once again, though, it's going to cost money. It's something that we have to think about, and I need to keep coming back to that because we don't have that yet in many of our thought processes, that if we want these services, we're going to have to pay a little bit more. But I think looking at social workers, more social workers in police is one of the ways to move forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Mike. So, our next regular meeting date is January 12th, 2020. That's tomorrow?
Which is tomorrow.
22.
22, sorry, 22.
Yeah, not 22.
And it's at 5:30. It's been a long day, okay?
Yeah.
Thank you for bearing with me,
Yes.
and thank you so much, and thank you
Yeah,
so much.
thank you.
Really, thank you guys, so grateful. So,
Thanks for everybody for coming. Yep.
a
I
motion,
will make a motion to adjourn.
and I'll second that. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Good night, thank you so much.